History has some crazy tyrants. But I found a legend so insane, so messed up, it literally sounds like a horror movie. The story is, a Spanish king named Peter of Castile didn't just beat his enemies. He skinned them alive. And then, he supposedly put their skin on his castle walls as a warning to anyone who tried to mess with him. This image is so crazy, it's been haunting people for 650 years. A king so insane, he made tapestries out of human skin. But was Peter of Castile really this much of a monster? A king who showed off his cruelty like a prize? Or was he the victim of the biggest smear campaign of all time, created to make him look like a demon and erase who he really was? This story is a total mess of murder, betrayal, and war, where people literally blurred the line between fact and fiction on purpose. To find the truth, we have to peel back the layers of legend, just like Peter supposedly peeled the skin off his enemies. To understand a guy like Peter, you have to see the world he was born into. Spain in the 14th century was not some fairy tale kingdom. It was a brutal, broken place, a real-life battle royale where life was worthless and power was everything. The biggest Christian kingdoms were always fighting each other for control, while also fighting the last Muslim kingdom in the south. On top of all that, the 100 Years' War between England and France kept spilling over, turning Spain into a giant chessboard for other kings. This is the chaos Peter of Castile was born into in 1334. His dad was the powerful king Alfonso XI. But this was not a happy family. The king had a super public, long-term affair and had 10 illegitimate kids with his mistress. One of those kids was a boy named Henry of Trastámara. Even though Peter was the real heir, his dad openly picked his other family. Peter and his mom were basically thrown to the side, forced to watch the king give love, titles, and land to his illegitimate sons. Can you imagine how angry he must have been? He grew up seeing his title meant nothing. Real power had to be taken and held, no matter what. This crazy childhood taught him the #1 rule for his entire life. Trust no one and crush every single threat before it can crush you. The stage was set for a massive family drama that would tear the entire kingdom apart. In 1350, when Peter was only 15, his dad died of the plague. Overnight, the kid nobody cared about was now King Peter I of Castile, the most powerful king in the region. But a crown on a teenager is a huge risk. The kingdom he got was about to explode. All the powerful nobles his dad kept under control saw their chance to grab power. And even worse, his 10 half-brothers, led by the popular Henry of Trastámara, were now a massive threat. They had money, land, and soldiers, and they were not about to listen to the boy king they'd looked down on their whole lives. The new reign started with pure revenge. Peter's mom, finally free, had the king's mistress arrested. A year later, she was executed. It was a huge message to her sons that their time was up. Even if Peter was just following his mom's orders, this move set the tone for his entire rule. He couldn't afford to show mercy. From day one, Peter's reign was a fight to survive. There were plots everywhere. His half-brothers, just as he expected, started to rebel. The rich nobles hated him for trying to take their power. They called him a tyrant. His personal life was just as wild. He was in love with a woman named Maria de Padilla and might have secretly married her. But he was forced to marry a French princess, Blanche of Bourbon, for politics. Then, in a move that shocked all of Europe, Peter dumped his new wife just days after the wedding to go back to his mistress. This stunt destroyed his alliance with France and made the Pope furious with him. It was during these insane years that Peter got his famous nickname, El Cruel, or the Cruel. He dealt with anyone who opposed him instantly, and with zero pity. Nobles who challenged him were executed. Plots against him were met with insane force. He even ordered the murder of his half-brother Fadrique, the twin of his biggest rival Henry. The history books, which were written by his enemies, claim Peter sat down to eat in the room right above where his brother's body was. True or not, the story went viral, making everyone believe he was a monster. He was a king who ruled with fear, because in his world, fear was the only thing keeping him on the throne. And this is where the stories about Peter go from ruthless king to an actual horror movie villain. The most famous legend is the one about the skinned hides. The story says 4 corrupt judges were taking bribes, so Peter had them executed, flayed, and had their skins tanned. Then he supposedly stretched their hides over their own courtroom benches as a permanent, disgusting reminder to the next judges about what happens when you're corrupt. It's an insane image that perfectly fits the nickname the Cruel. But did it actually happen? When you start digging, the story completely falls apart. The craziest tales, the skinning, the claim he poisoned his wife, the dinner over his brother's corpse, all come from one main source, a guy named Pero López de Ayala. And here's the crazy plot twist. Who was Ayala? He was a writer who worked for Peter. But, and this is the most important part, after Peter was defeated and killed, Ayala switched sides. He became the official writer for the guy who took the throne, Peter's biggest enemy, his half-brother, Henry of Trastámara. Think about that. The main source for all the horrible things Peter supposedly did was written by a guy on the new king's payroll. Henry had just fought a war against his brother, killed him, and stolen his crown. He needed to justify everything. He couldn't be the bad guy who stole the kingdom. He needed to be the hero who saved everyone from a monster. Ayala's chronicle was a genius piece of political propaganda, listing every crime Peter ever did, real or fake, to make him look like a demon who had to be stopped. Today, historians see what Ayala's work really is. They don't doubt Peter was ruthless. He definitely executed a lot of people. But the most insane stories have zero other evidence. No other records from that time mention skinning judges or putting hides on walls. These details look exactly like a black legend, which is propaganda made to make an enemy seem less than human. It's way more likely these stories were either insanely exaggerated or completely made up for Henry's PR campaign. The goal was to make sure history didn't remember the king as Peter I, but as Peter the Cruel. What we're looking at is a 650-year-old character assassination. This is insane. I want to know what you think. Was Peter a monster or the victim of the world's craziest smear campaign? Let me know in the comments right now. And if you're enjoying this insane dive into history, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. While his enemies called him the Cruel, his supporters had a totally different name for him, El Justiciero, or Peter the Just, and they were calling him that while he was alive. When you look at who actually supported him, you see a completely different side of his reign. While the powerful nobles and church leaders hated him, Peter's biggest fans were the common people, the merchants, the workers, and the peasants. Why? Because at a time when lords ruled their lands like total tyrants, Peter was seen as a protector. He enforced the royal law on everyone, no matter how rich or powerful they were. The same brutality he used on a rebel noble was seen by the lower classes as justice. If you were a merchant getting robbed by a local lord, a king who would execute that lord wasn't cruel, he was a hero. Even crazier, in an era of insane anti-Semitism across Europe, Peter was a huge protector of Jewish communities. His rival, Henry, used anti-Jewish hate as a weapon, starting riots and calling Peter the King of the Jews. Peter did the exact opposite. He hired Jewish people for his government, like his famous treasurer, Samuel Levi. When riots against Jewish people broke out, Peter used his army to stop them and even executed the leaders. For the Jewish communities who were always under threat, Peter's protection was everything. This wasn't just about being a nice guy, it was a strategy to build a stronger country. Peter knew that a kingdom's real strength came from a stable economy and one set of laws for everyone. Protecting merchants and minority groups who were key for business was a smart way to build a modern kingdom without all the drama from the nobles. So you have this huge paradox. Was he a bloodthirsty tyrant? To the nobles whose power he destroyed, absolutely. But to the Jewish family he saved from a violent mob, he was Peter the Just. His cruelty and his justice were two sides of the same coin, part of one single, ruthless plan for Castile. The war between Peter and his half-brother Henry finally exploded into the Castilian Civil War. This thing went global. It became a proxy war for the two superpowers of the time, England and France. Henry got France on his side, and they gave him an army of mercenaries led by the legendary commander Bertrand du Guesclin. Peter was completely outnumbered and had to literally run away from his own kingdom. He ran to the English for help from their most famous warrior, Edward, the Black Prince. Peter argued that Henry stealing his throne was an attack on every king's right to rule. He promised the Black Prince insane amounts of money and land to help him. The English, wanting to stop France from getting too powerful in Spain, agreed. In 1367, the Black Prince marched his army into Spain and completely destroyed Henry's army at the Battle of Nájera. Peter was back on his throne, but not for long. He broke his promises and didn't pay the Black Prince the massive debt he owed. His crazy brutality also turned off his English allies. Disgusted and sick, the Black Prince and his army left Spain, leaving Peter totally exposed. This was the chance Henry was waiting for. With new support from France, he stormed back into Castile in 1368. This time, city after city, tired of Peter's harsh rule, opened their gates for Henry. The final battle came in March 1369 at the fortress of Montiel. Peter's army was defeated, and he was trapped inside the castle. In a last-ditch move, Peter tried to bribe the French commander, du Guesclin, to help him escape. Du Guesclin pretended to agree, but he had already made a deal with Henry. On the night of March 23, 1369, du Guesclin led Peter out of the castle, telling him he was leading him to freedom, but instead led him right into a tent where Henry was waiting. The two half-brothers, enemies for life, were finally face to face. For a second, Henry didn't recognize him. One of the other men said, "This is your enemy." Peter, staying defiant until the end, stared at his brother and yelled, "I am he! I am he!" In that second, all their hatred exploded. Henry lunged at Peter with a knife. They wrestled on the ground until Henry got on top and stabbed his brother over and over again, killing the king with his own hands. For 3 days, Henry left his brother's body outside the tent for his soldiers to mock. One last act of propaganda to seal his victory. So, who was Peter of Castile? Was he the monster who skinned his enemies? Or the just king who protected the little guy? The truth is somewhere in the messy gray area between the two. There is no question Peter was a ruthless, paranoid, and violent king, even for the 14th century. He executed his enemies, murdered his own family, and ruled with an iron fist. The nickname, the Cruel, wasn't just made up, but the most over-the-top horror stories, the skinning of judges, the poisoning of his wife, are almost certainly fake, the result of a massive smear campaign. These stories were weapons, made by his enemies to justify murdering him and stealing his throne. They were the final touches on a monster that they invented. That monster was designed to hide a more complicated truth. The truth of Peter the Just, a king who tried to build a stronger kingdom by protecting its most valuable people from its most powerful bullies. Peter's story is an insane lesson in how history gets made, a reminder that the stories we hear are often just that. Stories written by the winners. The king who skinned his enemies probably never existed. But the legend itself tells a true story. The story of how a man's entire legacy can be murdered, and how a king can be skinned not by a knife, but by a pen. What other historical figures do you think got an unfair reputation? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching this deep dive into medieval Spain. For more of history's most insane and brutal stories, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.